Red Bull's Silverstone upgrade has just triggered a paddock alarm. Two new parts, for rival teams demanding an FIA check. And a question so dangerous that Red Bull may have to prove its car is legal before it can prove it is fast. That is not normal upgrade pressure. That is Formula One at its sharpest. Because one team complaining can sound like politics. Two teams can sound like rivalry. But four teams asking the FIA to inspect the same Red Bull concept. That sounds like fear. And fear usually means performance. The source confirms the central controversy, but it does not reveal the names of the four teams, the exact identity of the two parts, or the full FIA complaint. That missing information matters, because we cannot pretend to know what has not been shown. But the silence around the details makes the story even more explosive, because in Formula One, teams do not panic over ordinary parts. They panic over ideas that might become impossible to copy, impossible to ignore, and impossible to beat. Silverstone is the perfect place for this to explode. It is fast, brutal, and honest. If Red Bull's new parts give the car more stability, cleaner airflow, better tire control, or more confidence through the high-speed corners, the entire grid will see it almost immediately. And that is why four teams want the FIA involved before Red Bull turns mystery into momentum. This is no longer just Red Bull bringing upgrades. This is innovation versus suspicion, speed versus legality, secrecy versus scrutiny. And somewhere inside those two advanced Silverstone parts, there may be the answer every rival team is terrified to hear. Has Red Bull found the next breakthrough in Formula One? Or has it pushed so close to the limit that the rest of the paddock is trying to stop it before Verstappen even gets a chance to unleash it? Subscribe to the channel. To understand why this matters, you have to understand the moment Red Bull has chosen. Silverstone is not a soft landing. It is not a place where a team brings a strange new idea and hopes nobody notices. Silverstone is one of the most revealing circuits in Formula One. The car is exposed through fast corners, long loads, heavy tire stress, and constant changes of direction. If a new part works, the lap time shows it. If a new part changes the way the car behaves, the onboard cameras show it. If a new part gives the driver more confidence, the whole paddock can feel it before anyone says a word. That is why two new Red Bull parts arriving here are such a big deal. Not because every upgrade is controversial. Most upgrades are normal. Teams bring new floors, wings, bodywork, cooling changes, and small aerodynamic details all the time. They test them, compare the data, and move on. But this is different, because four teams reportedly want the FIA to check these parts. And that number changes everything. One rival can be dismissed as annoyed. Two rivals can be dismissed as nervous. For rivals creates a signal. It tells the paddock that Red Bull may have brought something that does not look ordinary, does not behave ordinary, or does not fit neatly into what the others expected to see. That does not mean Red Bull has broken the rules. The source does not prove that. It does not identify the four teams. It does not name the two parts. It does not reveal the full technical complaint. So the truth has to stay clean. Right now, this is not a confirmed illegal part story. It is a pressure story. And sometimes in Formula One, pressure is where the real battle begins. Because rival teams do not ask the FIA for checks just because a car looks interesting. Every garage at every race is full of interesting details. Engineers photograph everything. They study every edge, every duct, every wing shape, every unusual surface. That is normal. What is not normal is several teams pushing for attention at the same time. That usually means they believe the part could create an advantage worth stopping early. And early matters. Because in Formula One, once a clever idea survives its first serious test, the entire conversation changes. At first, people ask, is it legal? Then, almost immediately, they ask, how do we copy it? That is a fear for Red Bull's rivals. If the FIA checks the parts and says they are allowed, Red Bull does not just keep the upgrade. Red Bull gains permission. Red Bull gains confidence. Red Bull gains a right to keep developing around that concept. And the rivals have to chase. That is why the timing is so aggressive. The four teams do not want to wait until Red Bull has run the parts, gathered data, and possibly turned them into a real Silverstone weapon. They want clarity now, before mystery becomes momentum. Because momentum in Formula One is not just emotional. It is technical. One good idea can become a direction. One direction can become a package. One package can become 0.2 of a second. And 0.2 of a second at the front of the grid can change everything. It can change qualifying. It can change tire strategy. It can change how aggressively a driver attacks. It can change whether rivals are chasing, defending, or already beaten by the end of the first stint. That is why these two parts matter before we even know exactly what they are. The secrecy is part of the power. A hidden part forces every rival to imagine the worst. Maybe it improves airflow. Maybe it gives the car more stability. Maybe it helps the tires. Maybe it makes the car more efficient on the straights. Maybe it changes how the car behaves at high speed. The source does not confirm any of those effects, so they cannot be treated as fact. But those are the kinds of possibilities that make teams nervous, because Silverstone rewards all of them. A calmer car through fast corners is faster. A car that protects its tires can attack longer. A car that cuts through the air more efficiently can defend and overtake better. A car that gives a driver confidence lets him commit earlier, harder, and more often. And with Red Bull, that last point is the one rivals fear most. Because if you give Verstappen confidence, you do not only give him speed, you give him control. There is a huge difference. A fast car can win a lap. A controlled car can control a weekend. And that is what rival teams are trying to prevent if they believe these parts are the beginning of something bigger. They are not just looking at two pieces of bodywork or carbon fiber. They are looking at a possible shift in Red Bull's direction. That is what makes the FIA check so important. The FIA is not only being asked to look at a car part, it is being asked to draw a line. It has to decide whether Red Bull's interpretation fits the rules, whether the concept is acceptable, and whether the other teams have a real reason to be concerned. That is a heavy decision, because whatever the FIA does next will send a message. If the parts are cleared quickly, Red Bull can push forward. If the parts are questioned, Red Bull may have a defend, modify, or rethink. If the answer is unclear, the paddock will not calm down. It will get louder, and that is where the political side of Formula One begins. Teams will not always say what they truly mean. They will talk about clarification. They will talk about consistency. They will talk about protecting the regulations. But underneath those polite words, the message is sharper. We think Red Bull may have found something we cannot allow to become normal. That is the hidden fear, because once a concept becomes normal, it becomes part of the sport's direction. Other teams have to spend time and money understanding it. Development paths shift. Future upgrades change. The team that found it first gains a head start. And in a season where every small gain matters, a head start can be priceless. So Red Bull now faces two fights. The first fight is on the track. Can the new parts actually make the car faster at Silverstone? The second fight is off the track. Can Red Bull keep the parts accepted, protected, and unexplained enough that rivals cannot immediately tear the idea apart? That second fight may be even harder, because once the FIA checks something, secrecy becomes more difficult. Red Bull may not have to reveal everything to the public, but it may have to explain enough to satisfy the governing body. And the moment rivals know where the FIA is looking, they know where to look too. That is how a secret starts to leak without anyone handing over a drawing, a camera angle, a careful answer from a team boss, a technical clarification, a tiny change between practice sessions, a rival engineer staring at the same area of the car. In Formula One, those clues are enough. The best teams can build a map from shadows. That is why Red Bull would want this handled quietly. And that is exactly why 4 teams demanding FIA attention makes it louder. It drags the mystery out of the garage and into the paddock conversation. Suddenly, every movement around the car matters. If mechanics cover the rear, people wonder why. If the floor is hidden, people wonder why. If a part disappears between sessions, people wonder why. If the car gains speed in the exact area people expected, the suspicion grows. And if the FIA says nothing, people wonder even more. That is the uncomfortable space Red Bull is standing in now, not accused with proof, not cleared with final certainty. Watched, and being watched in Formula One changes everything. It changes how the team communicates. It changes how rivals behave. It changes how the media frames a weekend. It changes how fans interpret the lap time. If Verstappen goes fastest, some will call it genius. Others will ask whether the check parts made the difference. If Red Bull struggles, some will wonder whether the scrutiny forced caution. Either way, the upgrade package becomes impossible to separate from the controversy. That is why the first real block of the story is not about a single part. It is about the environment around the part. Silverstone creates exposure. 4 teams create pressure. The FIA creates judgment. Red Bull creates mystery. And mystery creates fear. That combination is rare. And when it happens, the whole paddock starts acting differently. Because every team knows what is at stake. If Red Bull is cleared, the others may have to chase the idea. If Red Bull is blocked, the others may have stopped the threat before it became a weapon. If the FIA hesitates, the controversy may grow bigger than the performance itself. That is the trap at the center of the Silverstone story. Red Bull wants a conversation to be simple. New parts, more performance, better car, stronger weekend. But 4 teams have made the conversation complicated. New parts, FIA check, possible gray area, rival concern, technical pressure. And once a Formula One story becomes complicated, it rarely stays under control because every answer opens another question. If the parts are legal, why were 4 teams worried? If the parts are questionable, how did Red Bull get so close to the line? If the FIA checks them, what exactly are they checking? If the FIA clears them, will other teams copy the design? If the FIA challenges them, how much performance does Red Bull lose? That is how the story pulls you deeper. The parts are the starting point. The real issue is what they represent. A possible breakthrough, a possible loophole, a possible shift in the development race, and a possible moment where Red Bull either proves it has outsmarted the grid again, or finds out that the grid is no longer willing to let its ideas pass quietly. That is why Silverstone is a perfect battlefield, because it does not let anyone hide for long. Not the car, not the driver, not the upgrade, and maybe not the secret. Now the story moves into the part every rival team fears most. Because asking the FIA to check a Red Bull part is one thing. Understanding what Red Bull may have discovered is something else entirely. And that is where the tension becomes much deeper. The source does not reveal the exact identity of the 2 Silverstone parts. It does not tell us whether they are connected to the floor, the wing, the bodywork, the cooling layout, or another hidden area of the car. So the technical detail has to stay careful. But the reaction tells us the important part. For teams believe these parts are advanced enough to deserve FIA attention. That means the concern is not only that Red Bull has brought something new. The concern is that Red Bull may have brought something new that changes how the car works in a way the rest of the grid did not expect.